Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. My name is Nicolae, Tusinschi, Product Manager for Formal Solutions in Siemens EDA. And today I'm happy to speak about a topic that I'm convinced was asked many times, but no exact answer was received. In today's talk, we will cover a verification methodology for high consequence systems that helps us answer the question, how much formal verification is enough? But first, let's introduce the term of high consequence system. So I found this definition from the O'Reilly, and it in generic applies to what we mean as a high consequence system. So high consequence system is one in which the consequences of failure are so severe that the trade-off between the prevention costs and the external failure cost almost always lead to a decision to strongly emphasize prevention cost. Translating it to semiconductors industry, there is need for quality verification in high consequence system, as they have at the base the semiconductors that we provide. Moving forward, let's look at what today's agenda looks like. So, what shall we cover today? First, we will try to review what we are facing nowadays when it comes to verification. So what are current verification pitfalls? Then I will jump into briefly describing an alternative to the current methodology that we propose. And the alternative is mainly code coverage based, but it has a model-based mutation analysis under the hood. And then we jump into the today methodology, which is called gap-free verification. We will introduce the basic idea of completeness tests, how does it work, what are the ingredients, and we'll summarize it shortly with few ideas that we get to. So verification pitfalls. Well, today you can see here is a generic verification process where we have requirements translated to specification based on which the verification plan is built. Also, based on verification plan, the test bench development happens, which is later verified. And once all the tests are satisfied, a verification complete can be signed off with the necessary measuring means that exist. What are the pitfalls that we see? In general, one of the pitfalls that we see is missing requirements. So requirements are usually developed to describe the design intent, and they are captured by engineers. And also, when it comes to what is sometimes missed is actually the never happening scenarios. So these are frequently missed. And this is where the formal verification is actually very good at. Another pitfalls that we see is the over-constraining. So basically what we mean here is we are over-constraining input sequences that are not fully checked, and also the input sequences of the antecedents in the assertions, and also over-constraining with the assumptions we have. Another pitfall we have is the under-constraining. This is where not all the outputs are fully checked. So we are missing verifying some output sequences as well. And the fourth pitfall is actually, you might argue that the first three pitfalls are included in the human errors pitfall, but I think I wanted to split them out and say that for what we mean by human errors pitfall is actually the subtle mistakes in the test bench development that are performed. Looking forward on how these verification deficiencies are playing, so they result in a negative impact that leads to redesigning and to re-verification iterations, and also it leads to a negative impact on the loss of confidence in the formal verification methodology. How do we address it? We can address it with a model-based mutation coverage. Basically, what does this cover? It's a methodology to assess on how good the test bench is. So we have in Siemens, we have the capability to address it with a quantified mutation, model-based mutation coverage, which is the most precise formal coverage algorithm available. So it helps to reduce the redundant testing. It shows where the test bench have gaps, and also provides a feedback in terms of such a annotated code where you can see what is detected and what is not detected. But model-based mutation coverage is not the topic of the current talk. So just for your information, this is an alternative to assess how good a test bench is. What we propose the gap-free verification methodology. And what we mean by gap-free verification. So in general, it's an automated formal check performed on the properties to check for completeness. And the motivation of it is that in a design, usually there are a small number of different operations, and some examples are read transactions, write transactions, idle, and also the arbitrarily long simulation traces from reset covered by sequences of operations. And the idea is to verify the operations exhaustively with formal, and also is to verify sequencing of operations fully. And this is where the gap-free comes in. And there is also a restriction, but that all operations must use the same triggering clock. And in general, when we say completeness, to summarize it, we want that all possible input sequences to be examined, all outputs to be verified at every time point. What is the basic idea of completeness tests? So the overall completeness idea is, it has a central idea in the simulation-based verification. So the exhaustive verification of RTL against reference model would ensure formal equivalence of RTL and reference models. And trying to apply idea of simulation-based verification with respect to golden model to formal. So we use operational assertion to build model reference model. So all operations from reference model captured in assertions. Operations need to check for all expected output values and whole model decomposed into small number of operational assertions. Completeness here ensures that operational assertions really build a model. So, and the gap-free verifications also ensures that the set of operational assertions is formally equivalent to RTL. So we feed identical input transactions to RTL and reference model, and we check for identical output transaction. So this is the idea, overall idea of completeness. So let's look how does it work. So in general, there are some tests that are required to verify for completeness. So first, we need to ensure that set of operational assertions produce outputs without ambiguity. So naturally, this decomposes into two sets of tests. One is called the case split test that checks okay, apologies. All right. Naturally decomposes into two tests. So the case split test, so it checks that some operational assertions triggers for each input scenario. And then we have the determination tests that ensure that the triggered operational assertions check outputs without ambiguity. Looking closer to the case split test, so this ensures that any given input trace is covered by sequence of operations, and also detects all scenarios where first one operation happens, as you can see in this graph. So the predecessor operation idle in our case, but there is no operation is triggered by end state of predecessor and given inputs. So idle is the predecessor, and then we have two potential candidates, read and write, and you can check if there is an operation that can trigger based on the predecessor. So the idle happens, the successor candidates, as I said, are read and write, and then the question that we answer is any successor candidate triggered. This is the case split test. When we look at the determination test, so this one ensures that each operation provides non-ambiguous output values for any input trace. So it detects all scenarios where first one operation happens, as in the previous case, the idle, but trigger successor operation does not verify the output. So if you look at the at the graph here, we have the idle, the right was the candidate, which is good, but it checks that write verifies the output properly. So the idle happens, successor write happens, and does write verify outputs without ambiguity? This is the question that the determination test is actually verifying. Everything looks quite simple because we have two tests that needs to pass, but let's figure out if the determination case split tests are enough. Summarizing what I said, case split, each input trace covered by sequence of operational assertions. So we have an input sequence that is covered by a set of operational assertions. In our case, it can be read, write, idle, read, reset, read, idle, write. And then we have a determination test that verifies that each sequence of operational assertions determines all outputs. And the question that we have is this already a complete verification? Well, the question that is follows up is actually, what if sequence is ambiguous? And example for this is, let's take a design that has two modes programmed via a configuration register, which we call config_mode. And it performs a normal DMA reads, which is the read operation, and then we have a DMA reads with parity checks, which we shortly say it's read part. The only difference in triggering this is actually the value that is programmed in the configuration mode register. So in general, we get these two operations that are only controlled by a configuration mode. Also, the input sequence is the same, the state is the same, the outputs to be verified is different, but the only difference is the configuration mode register. So different outputs when parity is enabled. And in this case, we need one more completeness test, and this is the ambiguity of sequence that allows either read or read par for some input scenarios. And configuration mode is not an input, and here is how we address it. So the input trace can trigger both operations. This is perfectly fine. The outputs are different for both operations, and then this leads to a no overall output determination. In this case, we need to verify configuration configuration mode register as a visible register in order to ensure completeness. And here is the successor test coming in. So this is another test in addition to the case split and the determination test for this methodology. And this successor test ensures that sequence of operational assertions for given input trace is not ambiguous. So it closes the missing gap in the completeness. So the case split test and successor test ensure that there is actually one unique sequence of operational assertions covering an input trace. And determination ensures that this sequence of operational assertions determines all outputs. But you wonder, okay, I mentioned a couple of times that there is a predecessor. So successor, determination, and case split tests assume there is a predecessor operation that has happened and perform checks about possible successors. But we also need a starting point where we don't have a predecessor, and this is the reset. So there is no predecessor on power on reset. Therefore, the starting point for reset test is just the reset sequence. So we have a reset case split for reset. We have a reset determination test, and we have a reset assumption. What each of these does. So the reset case split ensures that the reset properly covers all scenarios, starting with the reset sequence. The determination ones check that the reset alone determines all outputs initially, and then the assumption ensures that only inputs are used in supposed part, similar to successor test. All right, so what we have, so as part of the completeness test to be described, so we have the reset part, the reset test, which have the assumption, determination, and case split. We have the determination, which checks the outputs, and then we have the two tests that we have for the input sequence, the case split and the successor. And what you can see here on the right side of the slide, there is two additional extra checks. One is the minimality and the contradiction test. So let's have a look on what this test actually describes. So looking at the minimality test, this examines that all pairs of predecessor successor operations according to property graph are performed. So it fails if the predecessor successor pair is impossible. What it typically finds wrong transitions in the property graph, which I will describe in the following slides, and also can find the wrong hook on the properties. And the other test is the contradiction test. This is simply a simple sanity check on single properties, and it checks that vacuity test. So it only tests whether the property together with dependencies and disable condition from completeness plan is vacuous. So these are how does it work. But all of these tests, when we put them together, we need to specify them into a completeness plan. And let's look what we have so far. So we have the design, and then we have the operational assertions that exhaustively verify the design against the assertion. And we have another ingredient, which is the completeness plan. And basically, based on this completeness plan, we're going to end up with a set of the tests, the completeness tests that I described previously. So looking forward, so we have a design. This is RTL, or it can be VHDL, it can be a Verilog. It doesn't really matter. But I'm mentioning operational assertions several times. And when we have mentioned these operational assertions, so for the gap-free methodology, properties have to be written using a timing diagram assertion library, which is a Siemens library of system Verilog sequences, properties, macros, and it's more constrained than general system Verilog assertions. It has convenience because of the time points. So the library provides convenient constructs for describing time points and time intervals, and it provides the hooks. So it's a tidal macro to demarcate left and right hooks of the property. And gap-free needs tidal properties written in a certain way. So the reset use specific pattern, the implication operators, so it requires a single implies, the operators, non-overlapping or overlapping operators that you perfectly know are not allowed. And then we have the local variables captured using a set freeze macro, etc. All of this enables the operational assertions. So we have the cause part, we have the effect part, so the sum of the conceptual start state, the trigger, the local variable freeze. We prove a conceptual state, so prove a visible register. If you remember I was talking about the config mode register. These are a visible register. The outputs and also the right hooks are here. So how do we capture sequences of operations in these properties? So we have, let's say that we have these states that we identify. So we have the idle row act, and we have operations. We have NOP, we have reset, we have precharge. And all of this we capture in a such called a property graph. And the property graph is a way to specify the operations, how they can sequence each other. And in this property graph, let's say that we can collect operation properties starting in idle. So this is, you have from idle state, you have the NOP and row activation. So this is the outcoming. To idle state, we have the reset, NOP and precharge, and this is how you specify. And then you can also specify to idle state from idle state as well. So you can collect operation property adding in idle, and as I said, you can capture through idle sequences. So this is how you capture the operations on your design. And when you put all of this together, so you end up having a completeness plan. And the completeness plan is actually looking, this is an example of it. It includes the name of the cluster, the dependencies of the completeness test, you have the disable condition there, the input-output interface of verifying cluster, the visible register are actually specified here. The visible register needs to be determined as well. And then you have the reset property and the property graph. So these are the how you specify the completeness graph. Moving forward, let's summarize what we have talked about. So let's summarize the tests. So for completeness, in this methodology, there are three major tests. We have a case-split test, which is a sequence verifies that the sequence of operation covers the input trace. We have the successor test that verifies that the sequence of operation is non-ambiguous. And we have also the determination, which is verifies that the operations outputs are non-ambiguous. Also, it verifies these tests are carried out in an induction fashion. So if everything is okay up to a certain operation, it's always also okay for the next operation. Special reset tests because nothing has happened before. So in order to achieve the completeness, because it's a binary output, it's yes or no, all tests together ensure, when they are holding, ensure that the set of operations forms a model of the RTL. But tests can be carried in an arbitrary order. There's no specific order for them. And there is also checks that there is no functionality in RTL that is not captured in operations or excluded by constraints. So this is the key piece here where the benefit of this completeness test it is. Apologies. So let's look at what the gap-free are actually examining. So the gap-free verification provides, as I said, an automated formal check for completeness. It's ideal for high consequence systems where the complete verification is desired, as opposed to a targeted formal approach. It identifies missing operations and checks on outputs. Also, what if you have missing assertions that would have failed? So it also points out on undiscovered bugs, and also can identify over-constrained antecedents and unchecked outputs. So it's unique, and among all the model checking capabilities. And if you would like to learn more on gap-free methodology for high consequence system, there is a paper called from GOMAC Tech 2019. It's called Complete Formal Verification of RISC-V Processor IPs for Trojan-free Trusted IC. And we talk about the bugs we identified, and also the key is that with the help of gap-free methodology, we identified functionality that was missing. We find a verification gap. On this note, I would like to thank you. And if you have any questions, reach out to me, or feel free to ask any question in the QA section. Thank you very much.